Right now, as you are sitting watching this video, something is happening inside your body that you cannot feel. Your muscle fibers are losing their ability to generate energy. The mitochondria inside those muscle cells, the tiny structures that power every movement, every thought, every heartbeat, are becoming fewer in number and less efficient with every hour of sustained inactivity. Your blood vessels are becoming stiffer. Your insulin sensitivity is quietly declining, and a low-level inflammatory signal is running through your circulatory system, slowly and silently doing damage to your heart, your brain, and your kidneys. None of this causes pain, none of it announces itself. It accumulates over months and years, like rust on a pipe, invisible until something fails. Now here is what the research has established clearly, and what most people have never been told in terms they can actually use. A single daily walk, not a run, not a gym session, not a structured fitness program, but an ordinary sustained daily walk, consistently performed over years, interrupts every one of those processes at the biological level. It does not just burn a few calories, it does not just help with weight. It reaches into the cellular machinery of your body and switches on repair and maintenance systems that nothing else triggers quite as effectively. The question is not whether walking works, the science on that is settled. The question is why, and once you understand the mechanism, everything changes. Because when you understand what a daily walk is actually doing inside your arteries, your muscle cells, your brain tissue, and your metabolic system, you stop thinking of it as gentle exercise. You start thinking of it as the most accessible longevity intervention in human medicine. And you start taking it seriously in a way that most people who know they should walk more simply never do. Hi, I am Dr. Alex. I am an emergency medicine doctor, and after nearly 10 years working in AAN-EE, I have seen what the absence of this kind of baseline physical activity costs people. I have seen 68-year-olds arrive in cardiac failure who by every measure of their history should not have been there yet. I have seen the progression of vascular dementia, the falls that end in dependence, the metabolic deterioration that turns a manageable condition into a catastrophic one. And what becomes very clear when you work on the front line of disease is that most of this is not inevitable. It is the downstream result of decades of biological neglect, and much of it was interruptible. My goal now is to give people the biological understanding they need to make genuinely informed decisions about their health, not just what to do, but why it works, grounded in the science. If you are watching this video, there is a good chance you already know that walking is good for you. What I am going to give you today is something your doctor probably did not have time to explain, the precise biological mechanisms behind why it works, and why consistency over years matters in ways that go far beyond fitness. I promise to keep making videos like this, grounded in science and clinical experience, to help you live longer and healthier. All I ask in return is that you give this channel a chance and hit the subscribe button. If you reach the end of this video and you have not learned something genuinely useful, feel free to unsubscribe, no hard feelings at all. But if you give me your time and attention, I will give you everything I have learned from over a decade in medicine. Please hit subscribe to help this channel reach more people like you, and let us continue with the video. Establishing the system, what inactivity actually does. Before we can appreciate what a daily walk does for your body, we need to understand what the absence of regular movement does to it. Because the damage done by chronic inactivity is not passive, it is not simply that you are missing out on benefits. Sustained physical inactivity actively triggers a set of biological processes that accelerate aging at the cellular level. The first process is mitochondrial decline. Your mitochondria, the energy-generating structures inside every cell, are not static. They respond to demand. When your muscles are regularly asked to sustain movement over extended periods, the body responds by building more mitochondria through a process called mitochondrial biogenesis. When that demand is absent for long periods, the body reduces its investment in mitochondrial infrastructure. Fewer mitochondria means less cellular energy output, slower recovery from illness, greater fatigue, and a reduced capacity for every system in the body to function optimally. The second process is the accumulation of chronic low-grade inflammation. In a physically active body, anti-inflammatory signals are regularly produced during and after movement. In a sedentary body, those signals are absent and the inflammatory baseline gradually rises. This matters profoundly because chronic low-grade inflammation is the shared driver of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cognitive decline, and several forms of cancer. It is not the dramatic inflammation of an infection or injury. It is a persistent, low-level signal that damages tissue slowly and continuously over decades. Inactivity is not simply the absence of benefit. It is an active biological state, one that your body responds to in ways that accelerate every major aging pathway we know about. The third process is progressive insulin resistance. Skeletal muscle is the largest insulin-sensitive organ in the body. When muscle is regularly contracted, it absorbs glucose from the bloodstream through insulin-independent pathways, essentially bypassing the need for insulin signaling altogether. When muscle is rarely contracted, this mechanism becomes underused and eventually impaired. The result is that blood glucose remains elevated for longer after meals. Insulin must work harder to achieve the same effect. And over years, the metabolic dysfunction associated with insulin resistance, vascular damage, cognitive impairment, organ stress accumulates. The fourth process involves the cardiovascular system directly. Blood vessels are lined with a thin active layer of cells called the endothelium. These cells produce nitric oxide, a molecule that keeps arteries relaxed, compliant, and free from the stiffening that raises blood pressure and creates the conditions for atherosclerosis. Endothelial health is maintained by regular exposure to what is called shear stress, the mechanical force of blood moving swiftly through vessels during physical activity. In the absence of that regular mechanical stimulus, nitric oxide production declines, vessels stiffen, and blood pressure rises. The conventional framing of walking as exercise positions it primarily as a tool for weight management and general fitness. And those benefits are real. But this framing dramatically undersells what regular walking actually does, because weight management and fitness are outcomes of the underlying biological processes. They are not the mechanisms themselves. Most public health advice around walking focuses on step counts, the widely cited 10,000 steps per day figure, which originated not from clinical research, but from a Japanese marketing campaign for a pedometer in 1965. Research published in JAMA Internal Medicine has since shown that the mortality benefits of walking begin to plateau well below 10,000 steps, and that the quality and consistency of movement matters more than hitting an arbitrary daily number. The 10,000 steps target is not science. What the science actually shows is that the benefits of walking are primarily driven by biological consistency, the same moderate demand placed on your cardiovascular and muscular systems day after day, year after year. What the conventional framing also misses entirely is the neurological dimension of walking, the effects on brain structure, cognitive function, and mental health that are now among the most compelling findings in the entire physical activity literature. We will come to that shortly because it changes how you should think about walking as a long-term investment in your future self. Introducing the missing mechanism, the three pathways of walking's power. What we are now understanding, drawing on research from cardiovascular medicine, neuroscience, and metabolic biology, is that a daily walk does not work through a single mechanism. It works through at least three distinct and overlapping biological pathways simultaneously, and that convergence is precisely why it is so unusually powerful for such a low-intensity activity. The first pathway is endothelial restoration. Every time you sustain a moderate walking pace for 20 minutes or more, you generate shear stress on your arterial walls that stimulates endothelial nitric oxide synthase, the enzyme that produces nitric oxide. Research published in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology has demonstrated that regular moderate intensity walking measurably improves endothelial function within weeks, reducing arterial stiffness and lowering resting blood pressure independently of any change in body weight. The second pathway is mitochondrial biogenesis, the building of new energy-generating machinery inside your muscle cells. Walking activates a protein called PGC1 alpha, which functions as the master regulator of mitochondrial production. Think of it as the switch that signals your cells. Sustained demand is present, build more infrastructure. Over months of consistent walking, this results in measurably higher mitochondrial density in muscle tissue, which translates to better energy regulation, improved metabolic efficiency, and a greater capacity for physical resilience as you age. The third pathway is neurological. Walking, particularly outdoor walking with moderate variation in terrain and pace, is one of the most reliable known activators of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. BDNF is a protein that supports the growth, maintenance, and connection of neurons. It is most concentrated in the hippocampus, the brain region most critical for memory formation and most vulnerable to the early stages of Alzheimer's disease. Research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that regular aerobic walking increased hippocampal volume by approximately 2% in older adults, reversing the age-related shrinkage that otherwise accelerates cognitive decline. A daily walk is not one thing. It is simultaneously a cardiovascular intervention, a metabolic therapy, and a neurological maintenance program, all delivered through the same 30 minutes of movement. Just really quickly, if you are finding value in this so far, please consider subscribing to the channel. It genuinely helps these videos reach more people who need this information. Now let us continue. So let me name this clearly because I want this to land in practical terms. The reason most people who walk occasionally do not get the full biological benefit of what we have just described is not that they lack effort or willpower. It is a single, specific structural problem with how they approach it. The biological benefits of walking, endothelial restoration, mitochondrial biogenesis, BDNF production, are not produced by a single walk or even by a good week of walking. They are produced by the consistent, repeated biological stimulus of walking performed daily or near daily over a sustained period of months and years. The mechanism here is essentially one of adaptation. Your body only invests in the infrastructure, more mitochondria, better endothelial function, higher baseline BDNF, when the stimulus is reliable enough to justify that investment. Occasional walking is like making one deposit into a savings account and then doing nothing for 6 months. The biology requires consistency to compound. This shows up in 3 very specific ways that I recognize from clinical practice. The first is the weekend pattern. People who are almost entirely sedentary Monday through Friday and then take a long walk on Saturday and Sunday. This pattern does not generate the consistent daily biological stimulus that drives adaptation. Research has shown that the anti-inflammatory and metabolic benefits of a single walk largely dissipate within 24 to 48 hours. A 2-day window of activity surrounded by 5 days of inactivity is not a walking habit. It is 2 walks per week. The second pattern is the intensity mistake. People who, when they do walk, push themselves to a pace that feels like exercise in the conventional sense, and then feel justified in not walking the following day because they worked hard. The biology of walking's longevity benefits does not require high intensity. It requires sustained moderate effort, consistently applied. Walking at a pace where you can hold a conversation but feel slightly warm is well within the optimal zone for endothelial stimulation and BDNF production. The third pattern is the most insidious: substitution. People who go to the gym 2 or 3 times a week and consider their physical activity needs met for those days. The research is clear that gym sessions and sustained daily walking produce different and largely non-overlapping biological effects. Resistance training builds muscle. High-intensity exercise builds cardiovascular capacity. But the specific endothelial, metabolic, and neurological effects of sustained low to moderate ambulatory movement are most reliably and efficiently produced by walking itself. None of these patterns reflect a failure of character or commitment. They reflect the fact that nobody explained the mechanism clearly enough to make the stakes obvious. When you understand what the body requires, a consistent, daily, moderate stimulus sustained over years, the behavior that produces results becomes clear. Inactivity does not become chronic because people are lazy. It becomes chronic because modern life was engineered with extraordinary sophistication to remove the need for ambulatory movement from daily existence. Cars replaced walking, lifts replaced stairs, desk work replaced physical labor, delivery services removed the trip to the shops. Each of these individually is a small change. Accumulated across an entire life, they represent the near total elimination of the daily movement stimulus that human biology evolved to require. The food industry and the fitness industry have both benefited from the confusion this creates. One, by selling highly palatable products that compensate emotionally for the sedentary life. The other, by selling complex and expensive solutions to a problem that a daily 30-minute walk would largely address. The system was not designed with your longevity in mind. That is not your fault, but understanding it is your responsibility. So what is the solution? I want to frame this carefully because I am not advocating for a dramatic program, a specific route, or expensive equipment. I am not suggesting you need to track every step or hit a numerical target. What I am saying is that if you want to unlock the biological benefits we have discussed, endothelial restoration, mitochondrial biogenesis, BDNF production, insulin sensitivity improvement, and the downstream reduction in cardiovascular and cognitive risk, then you need one thing above all others, a daily walk performed consistently for the rest of your life. The parameters that matter are simpler than most people expect. The research on walking duration and mortality benefit is remarkably consistent. Studies published in the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, and the British Journal of Sports Medicine all converge on the same finding. The majority of the measurable longevity benefit from walking is achieved within a daily window of approximately 20 to 40 minutes of sustained moderate pace walking. Below 20 minutes, the endothelial stimulus is insufficient to drive meaningful nitric oxide upregulation. Beyond 40 minutes, the incremental benefit begins to diminish relative to the time investment. This is biologically important information because it removes one of the most common psychological barriers to starting. You do not need an hour, you do not need to carve an extraordinary amount of time out of your day. 20 to 30 minutes performed consistently is enough to activate every major biological pathway associated with walking's longevity benefits. The research does not reward duration as much as it rewards consistency. A 30-minute walk every day produces dramatically better outcomes than a 90-minute walk 3 times a week. The optimal pace for longevity benefits is what exercise scientists call moderate intensity, approximately 100 steps per minute for most adults, or a pace at which you can speak in full sentences but feel your heart rate and breathing elevate noticeably. This corresponds to the physiological threshold at which endothelial shear stress is sufficient to stimulate nitric oxide production, and at which PGC1 alpha activation, the mitochondrial biogenesis switch, is reliably triggered. Research published in the European Heart Journal found that brisk walking at this moderate pace reduced cardiovascular mortality by 35% compared to slow walking, independent of total distance covered. The pace matters. A slow shuffle through a supermarket does not produce the same biological stimulus as a purposeful 30-minute walk at a pace that elevates your heart rate into the moderate zone. What makes this pace ideal for long-term adherence is that it is genuinely sustainable indefinitely. You will not injure yourself. You will not need recovery days. You will not injure yourself. You will not need recovery days. Moderate pace, performed daily, is the biological sweet spot, and it is the pace that the world's longest-lived populations have sustained naturally through their daily lives for decades. The research on walking timing and metabolic benefit suggests that morning walking performed before or shortly after a modest breakfast has a specific metabolic advantage over walking at other times of day. Morning is when cortisol is naturally elevated as part of the normal diurnal rhythm, and moderate exercise at this time helps regulate that cortisol peak, preventing it from remaining elevated into the afternoon, where it would otherwise drive inflammatory signaling and insulin resistance. Research published in Diabetologia found that morning walking reduced postprandial blood glucose, the blood sugar spike after meals, more effectively than walking performed at other times of day. For anyone with prediabetes, insulin resistance, or elevated fasting glucose, this is a clinically meaningful distinction. That said, the most important variable is not timing, it is consistency. A daily walk at 6 p.m. performed every single day is dramatically superior to a morning walk performed 3 times a week. If the only time you can walk is evening, walk in the evening. The circadian advantage of morning walking is real, but secondary to the primary benefit of simply doing it every day. There is a meaningful and now well-evidenced neurological difference between walking outdoors, particularly in green or natural environments, and walking on a treadmill or in an urban indoor setting. Research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences found that walking in natural environments reduced rumination, the repetitive negative thought patterns associated with depression and chronic stress, and produced measurable reductions in activity in the subgenual prefrontal cortex, a brain region whose overactivation is strongly associated with anxiety and depressive illness. The mechanism involves not just the movement itself, but the sensory engagement of an outdoor environment, variable terrain, natural light exposure, the mild attentional demands of navigating an outdoor space. These inputs engage the default mode network of the brain in ways that indoor monotonous movement does not, producing a psychological recovery effect that compounds the physical benefits of the walk itself. Natural light exposure during a morning walk also directly regulates circadian rhythm, setting the biological clock that governs sleep timing, hormonal release patterns, and immune function. The combination of moderate movement and outdoor light exposure in the morning is, from a chronobiological perspective, one of the most effective daily resets available without any pharmaceutical intervention. Walking outdoors is not simply walking with better scenery, it is a neurologically richer stimulus that adds a stress reduction and circadian regulation dimension that indoor exercise does not replicate. The final and most important principle is the one that ties everything together. Walking's longevity benefits work through a compounding model, like a financial investment that builds on itself over time. The cellular adaptations produced by consistent walking accumulate incrementally. Mitochondrial density improves over months. Endothelial function improves over weeks and continues to improve over years. Hippocampal volume changes require months of consistency to become measurable. BDNF-mediated neuronal maintenance is a function of sustained, repeated activation, not a single burst. This means that the person who walks 30 minutes every day for 5 years is in a biologically different condition to the person who walks occasionally, even if their total step counts happen to be similar. The consistent walker's body has adapted, it has invested in mitochondrial infrastructure, it has maintained endothelial responsiveness, it has kept BDNF production elevated enough to protect hippocampal volume. The occasional walker's body has not made that investment because the signal was never reliable enough to justify it. I want to be clear that I am not suggesting walking replaces any prescribed medication or treatment. If you are on medication for blood pressure, cholesterol, or blood sugar, please continue taking it and speak with your doctor before making any changes. What walking does is address the biological upstream causes of those conditions, and research consistently shows that patients who are physically active alongside their medication achieve better outcomes than those who rely on medication alone. They work better together. Let me bring this back to what I observe clinically, because the pattern is striking once you know what to look for. When I review the histories of patients who come in with their first significant cardiovascular event, a heart attack, a TIA, a hypertensive crisis, in their late 60s or early 70s, one of the most consistent findings is a history of what I would call structured inactivity. These are people who worked desk jobs, drove everywhere, retired early from any regular physical activity, and supplemented occasionally with a weekend walk or a periodic gym membership that lasted 3 months before lapsing. Their bodies had spent decades without the consistent mechanical and metabolic stimulus that maintains endothelial function, insulin sensitivity, and cardiovascular resilience. Contrast that with patients in their 80s who are managing genuinely well, cognitively intact, cardiovascularly stable, physically independent. When you ask about their physical activity history, what you hear almost universally is not a story of athletic achievement. It is a story of consistency. They walked to the shops for 30 years. They walked the dog every morning. They never owned a car or chose, when they did, to walk anyway. The intensity was never remarkable. The consistency was extraordinary. What I also see and find genuinely encouraging is how rapidly biology can improve when someone begins walking consistently later in life. I have had patients in their late 60s and early 70s who began a daily walking program after a diagnosis that frightened them and returned 6 months later with measurably improved blood pressure, better glycemic control, and in their own words, a clarity of thought they had not experienced in years. That is not placebo, that is endothelial function improving, insulin sensitivity recovering, and BDNF doing its work in the hippocampus. The biology responds at any age, provided the stimulus is consistent. A daily walk is not about fitness in the conventional sense. It is not about how you look or how fast you can move. It is about maintaining the biological infrastructure that determines how long your body functions, and more importantly, how well it functions in the decades that matter most. What is less well appreciated is that the mechanisms walking addresses, endothelial dysfunction, mitochondrial decline, insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, neurodegeneration, are not separate conditions. They are different expressions of the same underlying biological deterioration. When you interrupt that deterioration through consistent daily walking, you are not just reducing your risk of one disease, you are reducing your risk of essentially every major chronic condition that shortens lifespan and degrades quality of life as you age. The cardiovascular system that stays supple because of daily walks is the same system that keeps the brain adequately perfused. The insulin sensitivity maintained by daily muscle contraction is the same mechanism that protects against both type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease, which is increasingly understood as a condition of impaired cerebral glucose metabolism. The BDNF produced by daily walking is the same molecule that keeps your memory intact, your mood stable, and your cognitive reserve high enough to withstand the inevitable neurological challenges of aging. A 30-minute walk every day is not a small health habit. It is a systemic biological intervention that reaches every organ in the body simultaneously. The most compelling finding in the entire longevity research literature is not a drug, not a supplement, not a surgical intervention. It is this: the single behavior most consistently associated with extended healthy lifespan across populations, cultures, and decades of research is regular, moderate, sustained physical activity, of which walking is the most accessible, most studied, and most universally applicable form. So let me bring this full circle. The reason a daily walk adds years to your life is not mysterious or complicated once you understand the biology. It restores endothelial function in your blood vessels. It maintains mitochondrial infrastructure in your cells. It activates BDNF production to protect your brain. It keeps insulin sensitivity intact to protect your metabolism. It reduces the chronic inflammatory baseline that drives every major age-related disease. And it does all of this simultaneously for free, with no equipment, no membership, and no recovery time required. The system never gave you this explanation. The wellness industry sold you complexity because complexity is profitable. The pharmaceutical industry treats the downstream conditions that consistent walking largely prevents. But the mechanism is simple, the evidence is overwhelming, and the intervention is available to almost everyone. Start tomorrow, 30 minutes, outside if possible. A pace that makes you feel warm and slightly breathless, every day, for the rest of your life. That is the science put into practice. If you found this video useful, please subscribe to the channel and help us reach more people who need this information.